Here's what's coming up on your horizon. Well, last year, the U.S. economy turned the corner, creating more jobs in 2014 than any time in the last 8 years. But that could come to a screeching halt in 2015. Today, we'll take a closer look at our economy, from industries on the mend to those that may be hitting a bump in the road. We'll also look at how the weather continues to play a big role in our rural economy. And we begin what will become a regular feature here on Horizon, where we look at various careers and the people who work in them. Stay with us for Oklahoma Horizon.
Oklahoma Horizon is made possible by the Oklahoma Department of Career and Technology Education.
Oklahoma's investment in Career Tech provides more than nationally recognized technology education and training. It produces solid financial returns for the state's economic future. Oklahoma Career Tech, elevating our economy.
And the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry, helping good people grow good things. And now, from the Career Tech Studios in Stillwater, here's your host, Rob McClendon.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us here on Horizon. Well, we begin today with our annual Economic Outlook, our yearly analysis of where Oklahoma's economy is heading. And this year, that direction may be driven by slumping energy prices. Crude oil prices that were in the low 100s this summer have fallen to less than half that, a drop that could impact both jobs and curtail shale gas exploration here in Oklahoma. But whether this decline in prices will lead to an 80s-style bust or just a slowdown in economic growth is a question still looking for answers. All the while, motorists are enjoying some welcome relief at the pump.
A lot. I make $2.13 an hour, and the gas prices are so high that half the time I don't get to go hardly anywhere but to work because I can't afford the gas.
Well, prices at the pump are at their lowest in years. A drop that may be good for holiday travelers.
$34.05 for 18.22 gallons.
Fills this thing right up, and I'll take you one.
I love it. I love it.
But no Christmas present for the energy industry or the state's economy. States like Oklahoma, while diversified, still look to the oil patch for jobs. Oklahoma Governor Mary Fallin.
And energy is one of our key industries in our state, all forms of energy, not just oil and gas, but so many other forms of energy too. And it employs in the energy sector 1 in every 4 Oklahomans. So it creates a tremendous amount of revenue in our state. Close to 1/3 of our revenue that's generated is generated by some form of energy, the energy sector.
According to a report commissioned by the State Chamber Research Foundation, the energy industry is Oklahoma's largest contributor to state revenues. About $2 billion, 22% of all state collections. So when prices began to plunge in early November, everyone from 23rd and Lincoln to downtown Oklahoma City began to take notice. Chad Wilkerson heads the Oklahoma City branch of the Federal Reserve Bank.
We're kind of in a new regime of oil with the shale boom we've had and shale producers being in this position. Prices have fallen from over 100 to less than 70 in just 4 months for a variety of reasons.
Drillers like the one behind me can drill a well in as little as a week at a cost of $1.5 million. And while that is still some serious money, it's just a fraction of what it costs to drill in the Arctic or the oceans where the last big oil reserves lay. The exact reason why we've seen almost 20,000 new wells like this drilled nationwide since 2010, a rate that's 10 times that of the world's leading oil producer of Saudi Arabia, and a point the Saudis are not lost on. When OPEC flexed its muscle in the 1970s, creating shortages and driving prices upward, that prompted huge investments in oil plays all across the world, eventually leading to a decade-long glut of oil and lower gasoline prices. So rather than repeat that scenario, the Saudis and OPEC seem to be betting they can produce the cheapest oil in the world and thereby putting higher-cost producers, including shale drillers here in Oklahoma, out of business. An industry move that economists like OSU's Dan Rickman says may well slow shale production, but not end it.
because once you start doing that, you're going to start cutting out the marginal producers. And as the supply gets cut, then that starts providing some price support.
So while the solution to low oil prices may well be low oil prices, getting there may not be pretty. In fact, Rickman believes for every 100 jobs lost in the energy sector, another 60 will disappear across the wider economy, a multiplier effect that could be felt in every community around the state.
So not only are you losing jobs, you're often losing high-paying jobs. So this will have spillover effects on the rest of the economy that will harm us. On the flip side, though, that low energy prices spur national growth because consumers have more money to spend. So we have a little bit of an offset from the lower energy prices that help cushion the harm from the energy prices. But since we are an energy state, the net effect on Oklahoma is negative of falling energy prices.
So what goes up, just like in years past, does eventually come down. Now, while a pullback in shale gas production may be inevitable, long-term, the economics of energy have not changed. And when prices do recover, new wells can be brought online in a matter of months, which is why many believe current low energy prices are only one crisis away from rebounding. Now, when we return, we end all this doom and gloom and look at the economic positives to start the new year.
You're watching Oklahoma Horizon, featuring some of the good things that are happening in the great state of Oklahoma.
Well, oftentimes it takes a downturn in energy prices to remind us just how much an energy state Oklahoma is. And that had me worried when it came time to show you our annual economic outlook this year. Because when I sat down with economic analyst Mark Snead, it was the middle of November and oil prices had just begun to fall. And to his credit, Snead's projections of what that could do to our economy are still spot on. So Mark, before we start talking about 2015, let's look back at 2014. How did the state do economically?
2014 is actually turning out to be a very good year. You know, you almost have to go back to 2013. The oil and gas industry slowed down considerably, and it added some drag to the state economy. We underperformed the U.S. economy slightly, but 14, the state, returned back to that pretty rapid pace. We're outperforming the nation. Job growth is strong, income growth is strong. There's just a tremendous amount of momentum.
You mentioned the energy industry. Just talk to me about the impact it has on the economy.
Well, there's some question about whether Oklahoma is still an energy state. To what degree do fluctuations in oil and gas prices translate into changes in the overall economy? And when we look at it, Oklahoma is still clearly a Tier 1 energy state. It is affected very, very directly and very heavily by changes in oil and gas prices. In fact, in our data, it's almost as sensitive as it was back in the 79 to 82 period at the peak of the oil boom. So it matters a great deal. The thing about the industry is that it tends to either expand rapidly or contract rapidly. There's not really a steady state for the industry. And as oil prices begin to come back a little bit, at this point, we're assuming that the industry is having very little influence. If it pulls back further, we'll have some concern, possibly 2015 or 2016, but a lot of momentum right now in the industry and at the state level.
Now, as we're recording this, we're seeing $80 barrel oil. While that certainly is probably good for consumers that might be driving their car, maybe not so good for oil-producing states. What would happen if that becomes the norm versus a dip in prices?
Yeah, that's the trick. Most states benefit from falling oil prices. We know that. The U.S. economy as a whole benefits from falling oil prices. But when you're in an energy producing state, it's a delicate balance. You really want oil and gas prices high enough to keep producers satisfied, to keep expanding the industry, but not too high to affect consumers. And we're in that sweet spot right now. Consumers are in Oklahoma at least, we're paying sub $3 for gasoline, yet the oil and gas industry is expanding basically as fast as they can. And if we can stay in that sweet spot, it has a tremendous spillover effect to the overall economy, and consumers are perfectly satisfied. So
As you look forward to 2015, are there other sectors that you're particularly watching? What is the story for 2015?
The story is that we're clicking on all cylinders. That's the real underlying story. Nearly every major industry sector is doing well, adding jobs at a rapid pace. One thing I would argue is that the key difference in Oklahoma in this cycle is the quality of the jobs. You know, there's always been the suggestion that what we're lacking is high wage, you know, high skill, high quality jobs, and that's exactly what we've been adding at a very rapid pace the past decade. It did in fact start with the oil, you know, the resumption of growth in the oil industry about a decade ago, and it's remarkable. It truly is. It's affected overall average wages in the state. We're rapidly approaching par with the nation in terms of per capita income. So a very good story, a lot of momentum, and the quality is there as well.
So as we see this per capita income just continue to grow, what does that tell us from a education perspective? I mean, how does someone get into that economy, I guess is my question.
Well, there you have the sort of double-edged sword again. We've always suggested we should be educating workers and pushing them into the labor force, but all too many times that meant pushing them to Texas, to Dallas or Houston, or pushing them to Denver, or pushing them to the two coasts, that we could not absorb them. And I think the dramatic difference over 20 or 25 years is that you know, these young graduates in the state have a very solid opportunity here in Oklahoma. The number of these jobs that require you know, either a traditional college degree or even graduate training now have ample opportunity to find suitable employment here in the state. It's a powerful mix. It's coming together from both sides.
So if we are not just an energy state and benefit from that energy boom, what will our economy look like compared to the national economy?
Well, this is the concern really for 2015. Oil prices are already pulling back. If, for example, they pull back to $65 a barrel or less, that's a really serious red flag for us. It would act as a drag on overall state economic growth. Where we are currently, we basically assume that the oil and gas industry is having little positive or no effect on overall conditions. It makes us look national-like. It makes us look very national-like. And if that's the case, you would expect strong conditions, because we are now in that point where the U.S. economy is beginning to gel and we're beginning to see some momentum at the national level. So given the fact that we may lose our energy boost, it's at probably the exact right time, given a little extra boost from national conditions.
Do you feel good about our manufacturing numbers here in the state?
Well, you know, manufacturing in Oklahoma is also closely tied to oil and gas. And I think the short answer to that question is we will probably look very national-like or pretty good as long as the oil and gas industry is doing pretty well. A sharp contraction in oil and gas would filter over to the manufacturing sector pretty quickly. In terms of hiring, we are underperforming the nation in terms of manufacturing hiring slightly. I wouldn't read a lot into that, but it is a industry that is in long-run decline hiring-wise, but continues to grow in terms of output. It's a capital industry. And we largely are going to have to adapt to that, maybe policies that focus on capital and have fewer expectations about hiring from the manufacturing sector make more sense. Unlikely to ever again be a large source of employment, but a very large source of economic output. You know, the purchases, you know, the brick and mortar is very expensive to operate and maintain. It is, you know, it's very good to have large manufacturing facilities, the transportation, electricity usage, all of those factors make manufacturing desirable, but it unlikely will be a large source of hiring.
So in general, as you look at 2015, a positive outlook?
A very good outlook. Actually, the momentum of the state, the momentum at the U.S. level suggests that 2015 could actually be a very big year in Oklahoma. It's just that one big variable about the path of oil prices. That's the only real external factor we are considering at this moment.
I guess that wasn't my last question. I'll ask one more. If we do see those oil prices dip below $65. Will that be an immediate pain, or is that something that we could see a contraction that would go over a couple of years?
Well, you know, the oil and gas industry has very specific behavior. It expands rapidly and it contracts very rapidly on the hiring side. When they decide to make a move, they do it very quickly. I think, you know, we will be watching the unemployment numbers very closely. That is what we consider to be the best single indicator, the number of unemployment claims within the mining sector. The moment we begin to see any surge in that, we will become a little bit more concerned. But at this point, 2015 could be a very big year.
All right. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks.
Now we do have more economic projections from the Federal Reserve Bank as well as OSU's business school streaming on our website. Just head to okhorizon.com and look for them under our value added section.
Still to come on Oklahoma Horizon. We look at the variety of jobs across the state in a new series called Oklahoma Works. But first, our ag outlook for 2015.
Well, with unpredictable rainfall and volatile market prices, Oklahoma's ag producers continue to plan for the worst, yet hope for the best. Joining me now is our Andy Barth.
Well, Rob, the agricultural industry is never the same 2 days in a row. And with summer rains putting a dent in the drought in much of the state, agriculturalists look to the year ahead to see how production will play out.
It was a year of highs and lows for Oklahoma agriculture. No rain, and then a late hard freeze left wheat producers struggling to even harvest a crop.
We're $1 below the average price, with our stocks probably running about 2/3 of what they normally do. And that just doesn't make economic sense.
Kim Anderson is an ag economist at Oklahoma State University and says while U.S. wheat production fell, the rest of the world had a bumper crop.
And what we've seen in the world is the crops increasing in just about every other country. We're harvesting a record world crop now, and world stocks, wheat stocks, are increasing.
And Anderson says while he doesn't expect the price of wheat to increase anytime soon, as long as wheat is produced, it's good for the state.
I think low prices with a lot of product to sell is better than high prices and not much product to sell.
And despite a tough wheat crop, Oklahoma's agricultural industry is seeing the highest cattle prices in history. Oklahoma State University's Darrell Peel.
We have record high prices pretty much across the board, or we're very near that. We've got the lightweight calf prices in Oklahoma at the highest levels we've ever seen. We've seen a tremendous increase in these cattle prices in the last year.
And Peel says prices aren't slowing down.
This is a hard thing for a market analyst to say. We're at record high prices. We've had this tremendous run up this year, and yet I still think 2015 and probably 2016 prices will average somewhat higher.
And whether it's low prices or high, Secretary of Agriculture Jim Reese says it's time to look toward the future.
Every year creates new challenges, but farmers and ranchers are just naturally optimistic. You know, no matter what next year throws at us, I'm sure that we'll survive.
And Reese says the low prices and bad weather conditions have better prepared producers for the coming years.
You know, producers have really made themselves more flexible over the last 4 years because they've learned things that they've had to do to make it through. The drought in 2011 was really difficult to get through, but I think all of our producers are going to be stronger for it.
Now, aside from a tough wheat crop, producers harvested high-quality summer crops, and cattle producers had good grass to graze on. And Rob, all of this is thanks to great rain at the right time.
Now, Andy, if my memory serves me, it was 2011 that the drought caused a fairly substantial sell-off of cattle that many had feared would really change the very nature of Oklahoma's cattle industry.
That's right, Rob. 2011 took a direct hit when it comes to cattle numbers, and those low cattle numbers in turn have created record high prices. And those cattle producers, they're making a comeback. Let's take a look.
It's working time at Double C Ranch. And for owner Chuck Coffey, there is a lot fewer cattle to work with.
We went from about 800 cows down to about 450.
The drought in 2011 forced most cattle ranchers to sell most of their herds, while some had to sell out completely. Yet, thanks to some moisture, producers like Coffey are back in production.
We kept buying cows in hopes that things would get a little bit better and we would catch some rain. Then things started improving and we were able to increase our cow herd back up to numbers that we would like to maintain.
Yet these low cattle numbers are also affecting consumers. The price of a pound of hamburger is currently around $3.39. That's 56% higher than it was in 2010. And according to Wells Fargo economist Michael Swanson, the rise in beef prices could cause lower beef consumption.
When you have 15-20% year-over-year inflation at the consumer level, when they're seeing 2% pay raises, they have to choose to consume less of what you're selling them.
And while U.S. beef numbers are expected to come back, Swanson says producers must be cautious not to lose their customers.
We have to be careful that we don't chase out future demand, so when we get more cattle, have more beef, that people are so accustomed to eating chicken and pork, they don't come back to us.
And producers like Coffee are working to bring back the beef. Coffee purchased a new ranch with more land, creating opportunity for growth.
We've essentially doubled production, or been able to do so within the last year, and worked closely with the banks to be able to do that. We're highly leveraged at this point in time, but we're very optimistic with the future of the cow-calf industry.
Now, Andy, I understand the Double C has some big plans for the future.
They really do, Rob. Coffee is so optimistic about the future of the cattle industry that his 3 children all have part ownership in the company, and when he and his wife retire, the 3 kids are going to take it over.
That's always good to hear. Thanks so much, Andy.
You're welcome, Rob.
Want to share something you've seen here today? Well, all of our episodes are streaming on our YouTube channel at Oklahoma Horizon TV, or you can subscribe to our weekly free podcasts on iTunes. Finally today, we begin a regular series here on Horizon called Oklahoma Works, where we examine an occupation and what it takes to succeed at it. Our J.D. Roseman gives us some insight into what it's like to work as a farrier.
With metal banging, it's time for new shoes. Glenn Hayes is a farrier. Shoes horses for a living. Something he's done most of his life.
Well, I was working another job back in the 70s and kept getting laid off, and got the opportunity to learn from another guy how to shoe horses, and got started shoeing, and then got offered a job at a horseshoeing school to teach. Did that for 5 years, and after that stint, all I really knew how to do was shoe horses.
After 39 years of back-breaking work, Hayes and his business still thrive.
I like doing it, and if you work at it and treat it as a business instead of just a venture, the money's pretty good in this deal if you treat it as a business.
Good money and good horses, and his clients, they're good too.
Enjoy the people too. Most people in the horse business that I have for customers are all repeat customers. I don't do one horse too many times and then never see them. And I kind of consider most all of my customers as friends.
Friends that know his services are vital for their animals.
Very most important thing, because if their feet's everything to a horse.
Wild horses out in the wild travel over thousands and thousands and thousands of acres, and they keep their feet trimmed themselves. Well, we put them in a confined area and their feet grow, and they have to be balanced depending on what you're doing with the horse. Sometimes it's balancing a horse to perform a particular feat, and sometimes it's just keeping the horse comfortable because they're out in the pasture to keep their feet from cracking and busting and being lame.
Rewarding work, but it's never easy.
Oh yeah, very hard work. That's why a lot of people don't, they get into it and then get out of it.
And for Lisa's horses, she only wants the best.
I like him. He's been here for 7 years and he does a wonderful job. He's fast, he's good with the horses, and I haven't had one lame yet.
A high praise in an industry where the next job often comes from word of mouth.
There's going to be a need for this type of employment for a long time to come. I don't see anybody just saying we're not going to ever have any horses anymore. So there is a future in this if somebody's willing to work hard.
Hard work that pays off personally and professionally.
No wheels, no horse. If you don't have good feet, you're not going to have a good horse.
working hard, helping others, and building relationships that will last a lifetime.
Now, many farriers can make well into the six figures, in part because here in horse country there is a healthy demand for them. Nationwide, there are about 50 farrier schools, several of those here in Oklahoma that offer certifications. But horseshoeing is a craft where you continue to develop new skills throughout your career. Next time on Oklahoma Horizon, as parts of the state continue to struggle with drought, we look at the role of water conservation.
Some people think it should be paid, it should be even for profit, which is a bit strong. What we need to have is a water sector that is run on a financially sustainable basis, where the price of water reflects the scarcity of water.
Water, public policy, and economics on Oklahoma Show for the Heartland, Oklahoma Horizon. Well, that is going to wrap us up for today, but you can see more of any of our stories on our website at okhorizon.com. You can listen to us on the go with our weekly podcast on iTunes. Follow us throughout the week on Twitter at OK Horizon TV, or just become a Horizon fan on Facebook. I'm Rob McClendon. Thanks for watching. See you back here next week.
Horizon is made possible by the Oklahoma Department of Career and Technology Education and the Oklahoma Department of Agriculture, Food, and Forestry. Thank you for watching Oklahoma Horizon.